Hello everyone, my name is Kent Dahlgren with 214 Alpha. I wanted to take you through our latest sprint review. The sprint review process is one where we have our engineers work directly with our customer to make sure that their regular release of software, which for us is every 2 weeks, make sure that every release is in alignment with the evolving needs of the customer. It's foundational to software development best practices. What we're introducing is an augmentation to our banking feature. We have 7 pre-integrated functions. Banking is one of them. I'll go over all the other ones in a second. And what we're introducing is the ability that a community could leverage a deed or a title to self-fund their own development. And I'll talk about how. What Florian is demonstrating here is a smart contract, and it's a ERC 721 smart contract. And I know that might seem kind of technical, but let me explain a little bit how this works. You see there on the right-hand side, there's a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. These are specifically associated with an asset. It would be sort of like a collectible baseball card or something like that. And let me talk a little bit about how this works. Foundationally, our technology is utilizing something called a blockchain, and a blockchain is a distributed ledger. It's a ledger that everybody has a copy of the same. Actually, technically, everybody has a copy of the same ledger, and they're checking it nonstop to make sure that nobody's played with the numbers, right? So it's actually very, very resistant to fraud at a more foundational level. A blockchain has a programmatic interface, and the most common application of that programmatic interface is cryptocurrency. So when you hear about Bitcoin or Ethereum, that is an example of an application of blockchain. Now, our solution is exclusive to intentional communities, to small communities. So none of those tokens that we'd be creating would be tradable on a public exchange. In fact, from the perspective of the user, they'd never know that this is cryptocurrency. I mean, they could if they wanted. It just doesn't need to happen that way. You could call it a frog dollar, or you could call it a clam buck. It doesn't matter to us what we call it. From the perspective of the user, it's a loyalty token, which is really no different than what they do when they go to Starbucks and they put $10 on the Starbucks app and they buy a $2.50 cup of coffee and they leave on the app $7.50. That $7.50 is now held by Starbucks in the form of basically a token. It's the same thing as our platform. We build this for communities so they could basically launch and sustain their own economic development on their terms, utilizing the wealth that's inherent to the community. And the introduction of this augmentation to our banking feature shows that the people in that community now have a legal basis by which they can leverage common law tradition to leverage their property or deeds or any other collectible to fund the development of their community. So let me talk through this a little bit. We have 7 pre-integrated functions in our platform, and the reason we do this is because our communities aren't ones that want to staff an IT team. There's 7 functions because all of those are necessary to a successful community. There's digital identity, which is the ability to interface with any digital platform utilizing a certain identity, but there's a lot in there. You want to make sure there's no fake accounts, right? That's a pretty obvious thing. And as I shared in other videos, I have a substantial background in security as it relates to the use of fake accounts. So digital identity is one. There's a lot of different technologies. We bundle that into the product. Second one is secure communication, the ability of 2 or more people to communicate in a secure way, and that enables the communities themselves to be technically distributed. They don't have to be all in the same geographical area. They could be, Virginia homeschoolers who have kids with sensory integration disorders that are vegan. I mean, it doesn't really matter to us. We can define whatever parameters you want, and then using the digital identity, we can actually assert that that's the exclusivity of the network. So digital identity, communication. Third one is commerce, the ability to buy, sell, trade, auction. You can do payment plans, subscription. And that's just the basis of it's basically a community's own commerce platform built into a platform that's bitterly resistant to fraud. Fourth one is banking. Banking is the ability to send currency, to receive currency, to do microcredit loans, crowdsource funding, and as we're adding now, the ability to have a provably rare asset, which in the case of this customer is a collectible T-shirt. It's a T-shirt that has been, its entire creation has been monitored and tracked to make sure that it's in alignment with their policies pertaining to ethically sourced and that sort of thing. But technologically, what I've got is, again, the ERC 721 programmatic interface to the private blockchain, which means technically I can leverage common law tradition to, let's say I have a title, let's say I have a deed or a title to some property, and I want to donate it to an intentional community within specific terms and conditions, which would be then codified in the smart contracts, right? So common law dictates that if a witness genuinely observes the director or the owner signing the deed using electronic signature, and then they go on to sign an attestation clause, the deed is considered validly executed in a digital form. And I know that sounds like legalese, but that's it's common law, and it transcends statutory law. So what you've got is the basis by which your community could do some really cool, nation building in a way that is legal, leveraging some pretty bleeding edge technology that's really capable. So it's again the ability to say, okay, I've got a title or a deed. I want to leverage it as collateral. I'd like to then, in part of that, I want to get a large number of tokens, and then I want to have those tokens spent within this closed economy in a specific manner. And again, all that's held in escrow until the terms of the contract are satisfied. So all that's built into the platform. And so that's the digital identity, communication, commerce, banking. The next one is reputation. Reputation is not just, hey, does this guy deserve 5 stars or 4 stars? There's a performance attribute of that. Actually, the design of the reputation economy that I've created was largely informed by my background in manufacturing. I spent a decade in manufacturing for Xerox and a company called Tektronix. So this is, Fortune 1000 global companies, and inherent to any modern manufacturing company are statistical process controls, which ensure that you can improve the processes. And one of those is called Lean Six Sigma, and a lot of the process controls we put into our reputation system actually model that stuff, which enables a community to have some pretty sophisticated performance metrics to ensure that what they're doing is in alignment with what's the most effective or the most efficient, et cetera. It also introduces a certain layer of accountability because the 7th function is governance, right? And I'll talk about that one in a moment. But again, it's digital identity, communication, commerce, banking, reputation, which introduces an accountability on a few different levels. One of them being performance. The 6th capability is arbitration, because you're going to have conflict, you're going to have some disputes. We use a common law, private administrative process using notary. It's a common law thing. Again, it doesn't need to go through a court. You can use it, having agreements going back and forth between notary. It's effective and it's low cost, and you don't need to use the courts. And again, governance. Now, in the context of our platform, governance is not a replication of some sophisticated governmental entity, because there's no need. You're talking about intentional community. Most of our governance is policies and procedures, roles and responsibilities, and access and permissions. It's just enough governance to get the job done, and otherwise out of the way. And it's what governance looks like in the context of private sector. Who's a steward and who's a beneficiary, right? But there's an additional layer. There is some accountability. So let's say that I step forward and I say I would like to be the steward of this particular community. Now I'm asserting that I would be able to deliver on certain performance parameters. And if I don't, then I can be put into a remediation plan by the community. And if I'm not able to pull that off, then somebody else takes my place. So it's a lot of this is private industry best practices in support of intentional communities. And again, you can begin to see the wisdom on why we pre-integrate all these capabilities. You could go and find 7 different technologies, but that means you have to manage the integrations of all 7 of those platforms. And again, most intentional communities don't want to staff that kind of IT sophistication. They would rather just focus on the creation of their community. We manage all those integrations, and we do facilitate trade on a platform which ends up having their name on it, and then they get a pretty good chunk of that transaction revenue back. And they get to hold that extra currency. Like again, you have somebody come in and they want to trade $10 US for a certain number of frog bucks, and then they use some of those frog bucks to buy lettuce. But the remaining of those are sitting in basically the community bank, which then the bank can leverage as collateral to continue funding the development. Again, this is discussed in other videos. That's a pretty sophisticated capability being given to a community, so they don't have to go off and find an IT staff. They can actually just focus on leveraging the gains so they can invest in their community. So anyway, we'll be coming up in the next sprint review is us plugging the provably aware asset into the interface itself. We have to go through a lot of auditing on the back end. And then we have some other stuff that we're working on in terms of categories for commerce. And so anyway, I won't bore you with that. I'll just catch up with you later, and I hope you all have a good day. Cheers.